I wanted to ask, have you heard this new term that's going around? It's called sexual autism.
No, no.
No. So I heard on a couple podcasts, and I had sent it to one of my girlfriends who is also a researcher, and she was like, "What are they talking about?" So the theory is that if you are watching too much content online, that you can develop what they're coining as sexual autism. So it's like not being able to recognize your partner's cues, like kind of having like that low like emotional intelligence and like social
Mm.
reading, nonverbal communication, all of that. And then I stumbled upon this other study, and it was saying that people that just consume too much technology in general show those signs. So I was like, well, it seems like we're kind of cherry picking information there, and then you're trying to create this almost diagnosable term out of thin air to scare men specifically to not watch pornography and to somehow still continue like this doomsday approach. So I was interested if you heard it because I saw it circulating a few times.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I haven't heard of it before. So, in fairness, I haven't checked my Google Scholar to see if there's new breaking science I've missed. Um, that seems very unlikely, and I would say it's for the same reasons that I don't think erectile functioning is related to porn viewing. That is, people often say, "Oh, you wire to the porn," in a way that sounds similar to what you're describing. That
Yeah.
something about the stimulus um, is different. So there are many, many differences between viewing pornography and masturbating to it versus having sex with a partner.
Hmm.
That make it not generalizable. So in when we talk about generalizability, if you had an old intro psych class, this is where uh, you condition, say, every time your partner comes home, you get to have dinner, and you're trying to wait until they get home so you can have dinner together or something. And so when they walk in the door, you start immediately getting hungry because you know your time to eat. So that's a kind of a conditioned response. And then it becomes you hear the garage door, and then you're like, oh, they're home. I'm gonna get to eat soon. And so you start getting hungry just from garage door opening. And now maybe it generalizes you're at work and you hear a garage door open and you suddenly notice yourself getting hungry. You're like, what the? Okay. So that's generalizing beyond the original stimulus. And so people are saying that happens with porn and sex. That is
Hmm.
something about you're masturbating to that is conditioning your responses, but they're very, very different. So, for one, interacting with a partner is much more intense than interacting with porn. I know people claim that it's not. There's no data to support those claims. As far as I know, I have the only data on there, and I will tell you, partnered interactions are stronger stimuli always consistently than viewing pornography. So the intensity argument definitely doesn't hold.
Okay.
But there are also like qualitative differences. So like there are these things in our hairy skin that are called Z afferent fibers. They're only active when they're stroked at a particular frequency by another human.
Mm.
So those are not activated during porn viewing. And that's just one example of something where, as soon as I go to a partnered context, I'm getting a stimulus that can't possibly be associated with my porn viewing. So, the argument that somehow that's going to get overrun and none of your C afferents are going to work anymore, because why? I've never heard an explanation for that. And so there's just a lot of things like that, that it's the two things. There's no reason to think that they would generalize. They're just too different, I think,
Hmm.
of their stimulus. And that reminds me of your question before, where you say, like, is the orgasm different from one
Yeah.
to the other? An orgasm is a reflex. So that is something that once the cascade has started, you can't really stop it. It's kind of like a sneeze in that way. And so orgasms may vary in terms of their intensity, but they're highly stereotyped. So they really don't vary in terms of if you had it in response to porn or response to a fantasy or with a partner. But then people always say, well, but they feel so different. And I felt like this was more in my vagina. This is more in my clitoris. We are very well aware, if we ask, the sensations feel like they're coming from different places, but the physiology is the same across. So, for example, when I look at contractions, I can't tell the difference if I'm measuring a male or a female. They're just
Mm.
highly stereotyped and very similar across.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah,
Weird.
I would have expected it to be different. And then if the intensity is that much more with a partner, then you would assume that that would be more addictive than a screen.
Yeah, but that's not what they want to promote. So I think
Right.
that's inconvenient data.
Mm. So I wanted to get into, I guess, some of the healing and pleasure aspects of the research. So the way I found you, I was actually at a Jamie Wheal event, and he mentioned, like, I think he mentioned you in his book as well. So
Mhm.
the Recapture the Rapture book, and he was specifically mentioning some of the benefits of masturbation, of partner work, and kind of saying that there is some research that is suggesting that you can kind of you can kind of achieve certain transcendental moments through orgasm as you would with psychedelics. And to me, I was like, well, whoa, if we're doing all this research on psychedelics to obtain like those altered states, then why not, focus something that is a little less intense and a little less scary than having to take a substance. So there's probably a bunch of people that are a little bit like nervous or skeptical and they don't want to take anything. Maybe they never have, or maybe they have an addiction issue, whatever the reason. There's a great alternative for those people if we just
Mhm.
had some of the data. So I was curious, I guess, about that work.
Yeah, we are definitely looking at like what the brain states are in the course of sexual response. And one of the biggest challenges is sexual psychophysiology is already a tiny field. There are not a lot of us. And those of us who study it almost all use stimuli that are 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at the long side. So we're usually showing pornographic films to produce a sexual response that we can study. The labs that actually follow people all the way through to climax, there are currently three. Mine is one.
Oh, wow.
So this is why the science is so slow. We're tiny, and one of them has been stopped because that faculty member now has a teaching role, and the other one, I believe those folks have left the institution they were at. So I don't even know if the other two are collecting data right now. And so when we try and think about like what might be unique about brain states in sexual arousal that we can capture or use in some way, it's sparse, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have found that we think is unique and might speak to that is so we're not totally sure what triggers climax. Like how does that actually happen? What is that? One of the popular theories is that there's a lot of synchronous firing that happens in the brain at climax, which, if you've ever heard of synchronous firing in the brain before, it's probably in the context of a seizure. So we call this ictal activity that is unsafe. So
Mm-hmm.
you lose control of your body, you can fall, you can hit your head. There are lots of reasons not to like seizures. And so we say, okay, well, if orgasm is doing something like that, there's a lot of synchronous firing. Then we backtrack and look at what was the brain state kind of leading up to that. How do we get to the point where the brain can do that or engage in that process? And so far, with this really short window, we had been seeing a lot of evidence of what we call alpha suppression. So that is a brainwave that goes down a lot, showing that someone is really engaged, focused, and effortfully trying to do something. So that makes sense, right? Like you're trying to get into the moment. You're like, let me think, okay, what fantasy, or, oh, this person's really cute. Oh, I really love this person, whatever that is, to kind of focus on those sensations, those good feelings, things that promote sexual arousal for us. But what we found in this series of studies was we would get people aroused, and then we'd say at some point, okay, try to have a climax if you can,
Mm-hmm.
and then their only job is just to press the big red button beside their chair, because it's complicated enough. We try and keep it simple. We're also measuring a bunch of physiology measures while they're doing this, of course. And what was really unique is when we gave them that instruction, we said, okay, arousal time is over, like go for it if you can. There were two big shifts that happened. So the brain alpha activity came up quite a lot. And then something else we were monitoring called galvanic skin response, which is a measure of sympathetic nervous system activity, dropped precipitously to the point we thought the sensor had fallen off, the first couple of folks it happened with. And so what this suggests, is this wasn't happening right before a climax. This is like at the instruction point, minutes before they would get to climax. So some brain state appears to be necessary to have that experience that we didn't know existed, that we should
Mm-hmm.
probably document. And right now, the only thing I really know about it is it seems like it's a big shift from high effort, focus, concentration to some kind of a letting go.
Mm.
allowing the body maybe to enter this state where it can have a lot of synchronous neural firing associated with climax. So I don't know how these data will hold up over time. They're pretty new. We're still trying to replicate this. We did the work mainly in women first.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is guys just have such a shorter latency that, as soon as we tell them to go for it, like they just do it. So we're having a much shorter window and kind of needing to figure out how to adjust for that. And then our big study on that got stopped with COVID because
Mm-hmm.
we had to shut the lab with the exposure risk. So we're going to get back to it. But that's the latest is it really seems to be a unique brain state that happens somewhere after getting aroused enough and actually having a climax. And all the people who do Tantra and all these other practices, we just never studied them. So I don't know if those altered states might, like, is their altered state just this? Maybe it's just that section and they just are expanding it out. Maybe it's nothing unique. I don't know.
No, it's definitely interesting because if you see the health benefits from the altered state with psychedelics, it
Mhm.
wouldn't be totally wild and out there to assume that there's a possibility that you could also achieve those with an altered state with sex, right? It's like, well, why not? If it seems possible. And again, I hope that there's more than just three or more than just you that's doing it because it does seem like really important work for a lot of people.